Good evening, everyone. Thanks for coming. Adam?
Thank you for coming.
No, thank you. My first question is that I went to the place where I get my mail, the mailboxes store today, and there was a giant, very expensive bottle of wine, and there was no note attached to it. And I wanted to know, did you send that?
No.
Because I thought, well, I mean, then I'm left with a little bit of a mystery. I thought for sure the author of Give and Take was giving before the evening and sort of softening me up in some way, but I guess that's all right. Well, someone else did. Someone out there. Thank you very much.
The next unlabeled bottle of wine will be from me.
I've now made it impossible for you not to send me a bottle of wine in the next couple of days.
I'm getting the hint. Thanks.
I wanted to start by talking about the one subject that is scrupulously absent from your books, which is there's almost never anything personal in them. Why is that?
Hello, pot. I'm kettle.
Wait, this is not about me. First of all, totally.
Wait, hold on. I got to do the George Costanza thing. I'm out.
First of all, totally wrong. Who has written about himself ad nauseum? I have. You, there's not a peep about your background, your family, your parents, can you tell us even a little bit? Well, actually, before we do that, tell us why not?
You didn't really get there until book 2, though, right?
It's not, Adam, it's not about me. I'm asking the questions.
That's my answer. It's not about me. Not about me. No, I sprinkled in a story or two here and there, but I'm always more fascinated by other people's experiences than mine. I already had them, right? Why relive them? So I think that's a big part of it. And also, I don't know, I've learned a lot more from my failures than my successes. And if I wrote about me, it would just be like a book of failures, and I don't really want to put that out there. So,
because there's a moment in this book when you talk about about parenting, and you talk about role models and how the most important role models in children's lives are not their parents, but outsiders. And that was the moment when I wondered, are you being subtly autobiographical here?
No, I had amazing parents as role models. I think that I was just thinking about, specifically for a career, right? Unless you're going to follow in your parents' footsteps, or unless you're like a poor Andre Agassi with a Lombardi dad. I think the rest of the time, it's really hard to find role models in your own house for exactly what you want to do.
Yeah.
But I'm not really talking about me, am I?
So you didn't follow in your parents. Your parents are not psychologists.
Well, sort of. So I found out after I chose my field that both of my parents were psychology majors, and I didn't know it. I thought that normal people in their house.
You didn't know what
No.
You didn't know what your parents took in college?
No, I knew that they were a lawyer and a teacher, but I just assumed that like normal people talked about self-fulfilling prophecies at home. No, really, like I found this in a psychology class, and I was like, wait, I just thought that was the common vocabulary. So.
Yeah. Are there other large areas of your parents' history that were undiscussed in your childhood? Other than their college experience?
Probably many.
So it's a lawyer and a teacher.
Yes.
Can you describe them? I mean, their personality, are they like you? Are they unlike you?
Yeah. So my dad he actually always wanted to be a pilot. And so he kind of steered his career that way, and he did a lot of aviation law. He flies in Civil Air Patrol. He flies these like little glider planes with no engine, which is a little scary. And he's really intensely curious about the world and has lots of fascinating interests. My mom is like the biggest overachiever I've ever met. Like she will get excited about something and start working on it like years before she should ever even be thinking about it. And I guess I inherited a little bit of this, or she shared it with me, because growing up she always said, as long as you try your hardest, whatever grade you get in school, I'll be proud of you. And then she would add, but if you didn't get an A, I'll know you didn't try your hardest.
That's right. She was that
Thanks,
kind.
Mom.
That's right. Did you feel, what was your reaction to that attitude? Did you feel emboldened by it, cheered by it, intimidated by it?
No, I think actually, like as a kid, I used a lot of self-handicapping. So I didn't study at all. And then if I didn't succeed, I could say, well, I didn't prepare, or I didn't try. As opposed to confronting the idea that I didn't have the ability or the talent to handle it. But looking back, I think that it made me constantly worry about feeling guilty and letting her down. And we all know guilt is the gift that keeps on giving. So.
Yeah, as when did you clearly don't engage in self-handicapping anymore.
No, that kind of changed in college.
Why? What happened in college to change that?
I had some roommates who were insanely smart and still not doing that well in school, and I realized I had to start studying.
Was that do you consider that a pivotal moment in your?
Yeah, it was kind of a turning point though, because I had been like when I was a freshman in high school, I fell in love with springboard diving, which was a bad idea because I didn't like heights. I was afraid of them. I didn't like pain, and I kept hitting the water at like 30 miles an hour, where the surface tension is not that different from concrete. And I had teammates who broke their bones just hitting the water wrong. Definitely didn't like wearing a Speedo. But ultimately, I guess I got to college, and I had done okay in diving by outworking people who were more talented than I was. And when I got to college, everyone worked as hard as I did, and they were more talented, so I couldn't beat them anymore. And I kind of got tired of diving, and I took the discipline and work ethic that I had learned there, and I started channeling it into school.
Yeah. Do you know? I promise we'll leave your childhood in the next 45 minutes. But what was it that drew you to diving? Isn't that it's a slightly eccentric choice for a Jewish kid from suburban Detroit?
Yeah, so it's kind of a nerd sport, right? So it attracts all the people who are too short for basketball, too weak for football, too slow for track. Like, there wasn't a lot left, but...
Well, there was chess, for example. Which
Sport.
would have been more culturally appropriate. I think that's called a sport within the Jewish community for precisely this reason.
Touché. I was addicted to playing video games as a kid, and the summer before high school, I was literally playing like 14-hour days. And my mom came in one day and she said, "You need to get some fresh air. Like, I'm taking you outside." And she dragged me to our local pool. And it just so happened that one of the lifeguards there was an all-state diver. And on one of his breaks, he started doing somersaults and twists. And I was mesmerized. I guess I'd seen it on TV, but never up close. And it was just fascinating to me that somebody could leap into the air so seemingly out of control and land with such precision. And I just said, I want to learn how to do that. Now, unfortunately, I walked like Frankenstein, as my coach later told me. He once brought a metronome to practice to try to get me to walk in rhythm, and after 2 hours, he gave up. Later, my wife signed us up for dancing lessons before our wedding, and then she quit.
She gave up before the wedding.
Rightfully so. Yeah, I wouldn't have wanted to dance with me either. But
so you're an uncoordinated champion diver, is what you're saying.
I have really bad small motor skills, but the gross motor skills are okay, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Do you? Okay, this is the last question.
No, let's keep talking about me. This is fun.
Do you still think about diving?
Yeah, I actually have nightmares often. So the worst thing that can happen, no, I do. The worst thing that can happen as a diver is getting lost. Like, even worse than the pain is just hurling yourself into the air and having no idea what's up and what's down. You can't brace yourself for impact that way. And I still wake up with nightmares like a couple times a month of just being in the air, flailing, completely lost. And then the other nightmare that I occasionally have is you do a lot of visualization in diving because it's such a visual sport. And oftentimes you have to add like a half a somersault or a twist to something that's already pretty hard for you. So you picture it first. And sometimes like you get stuck in this tape that you can't edit. And so you're supposed to picture like 2 forward somersaults with a twist and then a dive in. And your body just freezes after the first somersault and you can't get yourself to keep going. And sometimes I wake up in the middle of that. It's a little bit unnerving.
Do you have pleasurable dreams about diving?
Not about diving, clearly. This is a very anxiety-driven sport for me.
Sorry, I'm now vastly more interested in your diving than I am in anything else. But you persisted for, how many years?
6.
6 years. And what happens now when you approach a pool that has a springboard?
Okay, so this is the mark of an obsession, right? So I have not set foot on a real diving board in 9 years, and I'm afraid to do it because the last time I did it, I wanted to go and train hours and hours a day to get better than I was, and that's no longer something that I want to spend my time on. So
Yeah, yeah. Do you? Okay, we'll stop. All right, let's talk about the book. But I wouldn't. It wouldn't be wrong to return to some of these questions.
I'll take that as a hint.
Because, well, no, because you have, one of my favorite chapters in the book is about parenting and about, well, you have two times you return to the issue of what it means to be a child in a family. We could talk about that in the middle.
Wait, you read the book?
Yes, I did. I hope that's not unusual in the people that interview you. But I wanted to start with, so the book is an argument about, essentially it's an argument about character, isn't it? About temperament. That there is a kind of ideal temperament for dealing with, productively with the world of ideas and such. And it's not a book, it's a book in which the word intelligence barely appears. In fact, I know it's in there, but it's barely in there. And so you're in this kind of, what I find very interesting tradition of trying to reorient our thinking away from these, as I like to call them, the IQ fundamentalists, and towards the. But so my question is, if you're right, and that what truly distinguishes people in complex environments are matters of temperament, then what does that mean for the various institutions that we have created in our world? So, for example, you teach at Penn, an elite Ivy League school, which selects people largely on the basis of their SAT score. Now, is there any correlation between your SAT score and the kinds of questions of temperament and character you're talking about in this book?
No.
Does that suggest that your own school goes about choosing students all wrong?
Yes.
What if I made you?
Don't lead the witness though, or anything.
If I made you admissions director at Penn tomorrow, what happens?
The school would implode, first of all. After that, I think what would happen is I would go back to the drawing board and say, look, what are we even trying to select on? So I'm a big fan of Barry Schwartz's view on this, that the college admissions process is largely a smokescreen, and that there are at least 5 times as many students academically similar to each other who could get in as don't. And we might as well just say, here's our bar, and let's either do a lottery or let's treat it like the medical residency matching program, where students have to rank and prioritize, and then you can only get into one place that also chooses you. I think that would make people spend their time differently and probably in more valuable ways in high school. But what I would probably end up doing is I'd put a lot more emphasis on originality, not surprisingly. And I really like the George Lucas proposal for this. He wants every child to go through school thinking about a creative portfolio. And at the end of high school, submit that with a college application. So it's up to you.
What do you mean by a creative portfolio?
So you submit something that's your own original work. It could be a film that you made, a story that you wrote, a song that you created, something original, though. It's an act of creative self-expression. And I would love to see that added to the admissions process, along with the standard SAT, essays, grades.
And how much, so that's about selection, but it strikes me that your ideas have perhaps even more implications for what happens at the school.
Well, you only put me in charge of admissions. You want me to do the rest too?
Now I'd like you to be dean.
No, never. Yeah, if I'm dean, what do I do? I think.
Oh, by the way, before you answer that question, this is actually a really important point. If we are doing Adam Grant U, do we care more about looking for these kinds of kids at the point of admissions or creating these kinds of kids over the course of the 4 years?
That seems like a false dichotomy, doesn't it? I think we want both. I think it's easier to influence the selection process than to know how to socialize students to college.
A social psychologist is telling me that they don't know how to socialize students in college?
Yes. No, look, I don't know that we have as much influence on the socialization process as peers do. Right? So we could control the selection process completely.
Wait, hold on. A teacher at a college is saying that the best way to socialize a student is at the point of admission and not what actually goes on. So for your 65 grand, you're not actually getting any experience that can be controlled by the faculty? Is that what you're saying?
Maybe 63 grand of that is uncontrolled by the faculty.
Are you suggesting you've become highly disillusioned with the efficacy of higher education?
That assumes I was illusioned to begin with.
No,
I'm actually serious. I think that, look, I think by the time people come to college, they make a lot of their own choices, right? And so, it's a little bit like the Judith Rich Harris argument about parents not mattering. How preschoolers supposedly pay more attention to what their peers do than what their parents do. I think when you get to college, right, like there are very few people who say, I'm going to find out what professors think is important, and then I'm going to go follow that. Right? Peers have a much bigger influence. They must have influenced you like that when you were an undergrad, clearly. You weren't just wandering around following the lead of your faculty, were you?
Pretty much, yeah. No, actually, I didn't go to class, so it would be very difficult for me to follow the leader. But let's talk a little bit. So let's go back to since we're on the Upper East Side, we might as well talk about the college admissions process, since, as far as I can tell, that's all people talk about on the Upper East Side. Let's be a little bit, so a creative portfolio is one. Now, does that run the risk of simply creating a new kind of admissions tyranny that favors the arty kid over the, I mean, do you worry a little bit about, I mean, one reaction I had to your book was that you're describing a kind of person, but we can't all be originals, or can we?
I think we can. I think we can all do it in our own domains. So yes, I do worry about this, right? So I wrote this op-ed about raising a creative child a couple weeks ago. And I was quite taken aback to discover that every single reader of the New York Times has a gifted child.
Yeah. You were taken aback. I took that for granted.
You start to see the comments and the emails come in, and you realize that, the question is, how can I create a formula now for not only raising a super smart, overly gritty child, but now my kid has to be an original too, and I want to program that as much as I can from fetus stage. Mm-hmm. And I worry a lot about that, but I think that the way that everyone can be more original is, I think conformity is a dangerous thing. Right? Conformity is about saying, I don't agree with your ideas or your values, but I'm going to follow you anyway, because I think something bad is going to happen to me if I stand out instead of fitting in. And I think there are lots of ways that people could think for themselves and be original that still involve saying, look, I believe this person's leadership is compelling and I want to follow. So I think, and we should see people being original in different domains of their lives too. So, not everyone is going to be musically gifted, but why not let 1,000 flowers bloom in that way?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So does this mean, keep going on what the admissions process looks like. I mean, let's be really nitty-gritty here, because I think it's a really interesting question. We're going to rebuild it from the ground up. So the kids are now coming in with something like a creative portfolio. Mm-hmm. You're going to have, is it possible to do college admissions in the Adam Grant U without meeting every student in person?
Sure. Yeah, one of the things I want to do is I want to find out what are your core values, what are your personality traits, what do we know about you as an individual? And then we should make sure that we're selecting at least one person who's your alter ego and the complete opposite of you. And if we composed half of our class with interesting people and half of the class with their opposites, it would be fascinating, or it would be a horrible, horrible experiment gone awry. But either way, I think it would be worth running. I guess what I would say is, I would like to see us really getting a sense of who is willing to think in original ways and challenge norms and conventions. So I'd love to say, okay, new admission cycle. One of the things we do when you show up for an interview, or we have a timed essay that does not give you the opportunity to let your parents write it for you, what we will do, or edit it for you, I should say, sorry. What we do is we ask you on the spot, how would you change this admissions process? And what would you do to improve it? And then let's take some of the people who have the most unconventional and worth trying ideas for how to do admissions, and then let's involve them in admitting the next class and see where it goes.
This last year has been marked by an extraordinary amount of unrest on college campuses, particularly elite college campuses. And I'm curious about whether, looking at that through the prism of this book, and about what you would like to see, how you would like to see students think and act, are you cheered or dismayed by what's been going on?
Yes. It's a little bit of both. On the one hand, I want to see students standing up for their beliefs and challenging systems and rules that don't make sense to them, biases and sources of prejudice that they see. On the other hand, I think some of the expressions of that have been less than constructive. And I had a colleague once who used to say, if you're going to point out that the emperor has no clothes, you better be a good tailor. And I think there's variance, right, in like how much sort of preparation for tailoring was done in these situations.
But aren't you, we're talking about 19-year-olds. I mean, you're raising the bar awfully high for 19-year-olds. You can't, if you're saying that you like nonconformity, but only nonconformity that conforms to a set of, sort of a rational, constructive set of principles, then you're not really interested in nonconformity, are you? If you want it, you got to sort of take the bad part with the good part. Or am I being...
I know what you're trying to do, just stop. Sorry, that was a Celebrity Jeopardy line on SNL that I always loved. I've always wanted to say it. So, no, look, I do think that this is one of the problems with encouraging nonconformity, is that you don't get to decide where it goes. And it can very easily be sort of taken in all sorts of directions that we might not agree with. I think, though, that Carl Weick, one of my favorite scholars, always talks about this idea that you should argue like you're right and listen like you're wrong. Mm-hmm. And I think that is a fantastic model for nonconformity, right? And what we see in a lot of these college campuses is people only arguing as if they're right and not being willing to change their minds or admit that they're wrong. Last time we did one of these, you and I had talked about the idea of maybe just inviting people to put confidence intervals around their statements, right? And say like, hey, here's an idea. I'm about 64% sure that this is true. Yeah. And how much better the world would be. And that's the kind of place that I want people to move to when they take a position of nonconformity, to say, I might be wrong.
Yeah, yeah. I have to say, what dismayed me about the reaction, now that you say it that way, that's precisely what dismayed me about...
Naturally.
But that was a failure on the part of the adults in the room, not the students in the room. Yeah. At Yale, it struck me, for example, they, as opposed to using this as an opportunity to say exactly that, now let's listen to the other side, they just kind of rolled over and said, the paying customer gets what the paying customer wants, which struck me as being a bit of a shame. But now the same thing, you have, I have a couple of bones to pick with you.
Just a couple.
With the book. By the way, parenthetically, it's a great book. You should all buy it. These are comments made out of love. Along these same lines about, when you were talking about the problem with nonconformity is that it's messy. That's what you're saying. It creates a kind of...
Yeah.
And so you have a chapter, a really fascinating chapter, about Bridgewater Associates, the hedge fund run by this guy, Ray Dalio. Mm-hmm. Now, since your book has come out, Ray Dalio has been in the news. And the very thing, what is in the news about Ray Dalio and Bridgewater is precisely the thing that you were talking about in your book, which was, actually, before I go on, give us a few minutes describing what you were talking about at Bridgewater, the culture there.
Well, we probably have a few Bridgewater alums in the room, so feel free to jump in. But it's a culture unlike any I've ever seen before. They have a lot of very clear, strong principles that Ray has articulated. My favorite of which is that no one has the right to hold a critical opinion without speaking up about it. And that means that if you see something that you disagree with, you are expected to share it. And in fact, you can be fired for not doing that. It means that even though they have a strong culture around these values in their socialization process, one of the things you're asked about every single principle is, do you agree? And if not, why not? Now, you can go into an interview, and you might be taken aback by how strong this culture is, and you might make an offhand comment to your interviewer, gosh, that was intense. And you'll get dragged right back into the people you were just speaking with to share it with them directly, because they don't believe in backstabbing there. They want you to front stab. It's an actual term used there.
Yeah.
Because they're like, look, this political behavior is essentially gossiping and being a slimy weasel, and you might as well say it to people's faces so they can learn from it. So as a result, they videotape or audio tape every meeting, and they want to make sure that people are radically transparent so that they can build, instead of a democracy, an idea meritocracy, where the best information wins as opposed to the most popular perspective wins.
And you have some qualms about that, some reservations, but in the main, do you think that that culture is part of what contributes to making it a successful firm?
I do, yeah. I think they've done a phenomenal job avoiding groupthink. So they've been arguably the most successful hedge fund ever in the last 40 years. They were one of the few to anticipate the financial crisis and start warning clients about it in 2007. And I think the only way that you beat the market is you think differently from everyone else. And I think they've really created a culture where people are expected to dissent. And I would love to see more organizations operate that way.
Yeah. I just wanted to read from, there was a big Wall Street Journal article about them, and I'm sure you read it, but
I did.
In the context of this kind of culture, here's a quote of this, how they videotape all of their meetings. One video shows Mr. Dalio standing at a dry erase board and demonstrating how the marker ink won't fully rub out with an eraser, according to people familiar with the video. Mr. Dalio prods Bridgewater employees at length about why they bought the dry erase board, why it doesn't work, and how the bad decision could have been avoided, those people say. Now,
wait, isn't this what every billionaire founder does?
No, but I mean, what we're talking about in that instance is the kind of a side effect of radical openness, and which is that you end up with the founder and CEO of a multi-billion-dollar operation talking at length to castigating his employees about their choice of dry erase boards.
No, it's not a side effect. It's an active ingredient.
It's a what is it? Feature, not a bug. Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Here's another quick. This is another quote that I wanted to read on the same matter. One former Bridgewater employee recalls debating with other employees for as long as an hour whether a misused apostrophe in one of Mr. Dalio's research reports was intentional or not. It strikes me, the first and perhaps not terribly productive response I have to that is that they have a lot of time on their hands. I mean, in a certain sense, which leads to a serious question, which is, are these kinds of cultures where you're basically saying, we are willing to devote a good deal more of our energy to the social management of dissent and honesty. These are only possible under certain kinds of idealized circumstances. A firm that has algorithms doing its trading and 40% margins is a place where you can do that. Can you do this if you're making cars in Detroit?
I think you have to do this, at least a version of it. So I went in not knowing what to expect. I'd heard a lot of interesting stories about this being an unusual place. And look, there are changes that I would make to Bridgewater. I wrote about some of them. But what I came away most impressed by was the fact that you look at a situation like this on its face, and you're like, wow, these people are wasting a lot of time. But if you go deeper, I think what Ray's insight is on this is that when you see a problem happen, most of life in organizations and life in general is just situations repeating themselves over and over again. And there are only so many different kinds of situations you can run into. And so the question is, like, if we ended up with a marker that doesn't work, is that revealing of something fundamentally problematic about our decision-making process? And can we use this as an instance to learn from a minor mistake so that then we can avoid the major one, right? You can imagine if NASA had decision-making processes like this, it's possible Challenger and Columbia wouldn't have blown up. And I think that, I think of David Lee Roth as such a clear example of this, right? Like the idea of hiding or looking for the M&M that's specified in the contract to be a certain color. And if it's not, wondering whether you're going to be safe at a concert. I think Bridgewater is looking for those same needles in haystacks that suggest we have a deeper problem and we need to understand it.
It's a very generous reading of that. I'm not mean.
No, I don't actually think so. I think they hire a lot of very bright people who spend a lot of time thinking about how to navigate their culture. And if this was complete time wasted, they would have had a debate about that and resolved it in favor of, let's not talk about whiteboards and markers anymore. The fact that it continues to happen leads me to think that people see value in it. And at minimum, that they're learning to dissent in areas that probably aren't ego-threatening, so that then you have the patterns built up for the time when you really need to challenge somebody.
Yeah. So you're saying that there are, those kinds of esoteric debates on relatively trivial matters are almost rehearsals for more serious debates on questions of substance.
Yeah, they're like practice before the game. And most of us don't ever practice, right? We're always playing the game.
Here's my question. Are they practice before the game, or do they so exhaust us that we have no energy left for the I mean, my reaction to that, no, I'm totally open. I could be wrong, but I read that and I was like, if I was at Bridgewater, I would shoot myself. I was like,
They might actually shoot you first.
I'm here because I would like to make hundreds of millions of dollars for myself, and I'm subjected to long arguments about dry erase boards.
You know, I will say, like what I heard consistently from people, so they have a very high turnover rate in the first 18 months. It's not a place for everyone. After that, turnover is pretty rare. And what I heard from a lot of people is, look, I can make lots of money anywhere. What's unique about this place is people tell me the truth, and they give me critical feedback, and I get better. And after living in this environment, I can't imagine going back somewhere where people are constantly saying nice things to my face and then stabbing me in the back. I just don't want to live that way. And I guess that part of it really resonated with me. There's so many moments when I think, like, as fun as it is when you go into work in the morning and you say good morning and people are like, great point! Like, you don't want to live in that world.
Do you try and live your own life that way?
I do as much as I can. So there's some former students in the room who have been part of this. So when I taught my first class ever, I collected feedback forms about a month in to find out how it was going. And then I decided I wanted to have a discussion with the class about how to improve it. And I had a bunch of colleagues who said, don't do this, because if everyone individually finds out that their complaints are shared, then there's going to be a mutiny. And I said, yeah, that's possible, but I want to learn, and I want to engage the class in helping me become a better teacher. So I typed up all the comments verbatim. I emailed them to the whole class. It was especially fun to send out a comment that said, you remind us of a Muppet. I was like, why didn't you tell me which one? I still want to know to this day.
That's radical openness.
Yeah, but what was great about it was when I then had a class session devoted to discussing the feedback, and I said, look, like any good organizational psychologist, I did a content analysis of all of the critical comments. Here are the 5 major categories of concerns. Here are some ideas for how to address them. What do you think? And then we discuss it. And I learned a huge amount from it.
What did you learn?
I learned that you cannot please every student. Like, literally half the students were lecture more, the other half lecture less. I'm like, I'm going to keep doing what I'm doing then. And you're all going to be a little bit unhappy. No, there were a lot of great ideas for adding new formats to the class. A lot of people asked for more debate, which, as a really agreeable person, was not my instinct, because I wanted to make sure everyone got along. But the biggest thing that I learned was criticism in public was actually helpful. I thought it would be more vulnerable and more embarrassing. But what I learned after doing it was being on stage, I wasn't just getting evaluated on the quality of my class. I was also getting evaluated on how well I took the feedback. And so being there in public forced me to be receptive and listen, as opposed to defensive. So I've done that every year since, and I feel like I learned something valuable and new every year.
Mm-hmm. Do you, how does this, I had said, go back 10 minutes, we started talking about how this way of looking at the world ought to change the job of letting people into college. Well, let's move on to another institution. How should this change the way we pick presidents?
Wow. All right, so we are not supposed to talk about any Wharton alums in public. So I'm going to speak in generalities here.
Yeah.
First of all, I think it's unbelievable that we have an election process that's basically a popularity contest instead of a competence contest. Honestly, I would be willing to vote for anyone who demonstrates effective leadership skills, decision-making, forecasting, visioning, conflict resolution, various points on the ideology spectrum. If they show me they can lead effectively, I want that person in charge of the country. And if you look at research on American presidents, the most effective ones consistently were the ones who were willing to challenge the status quo. Look at Lincoln, for example, right? Lincoln was wildly unpopular in his time. for making some decisions that a lot of people disagreed with, and yet probably the most important thing that's happened in this country to date. I think that I would love to see a process where we could figure out, okay, who's able to take an original non-conforming vision and get other people behind it. Mm-hmm. I would also explode the two-party system. I think it's a disaster. I'd also like to see, we want to make sure that nonconformity is sane, not crazy. So in addition to physicals, I would like candidates to get mentals.
What?
Wait, and there's actually research on how to do this.
Yeah.
There was a psychiatrist, Irving Gottschalk, who did this for years. He would take public speeches that were impromptu, not prepared, and he'd look at things like, do you repeat the same words over and over again without realizing
That's relevant this time around, isn't it?
It could be. He'd look at, are you sort of telling stories that don't have a logical conclusion, or do you make a leap from one thought to another? And the neat thing is you have the candidate's baseline before. And so you can see whether it's a deviation from baseline or whether the candidate is always a little bit off.
But if we gave a mental to the candidates out there, who do you suppose would win and who do you suppose would lose?
I'm not sure that I have anything to say that hasn't already been thought on that one.
I see. But the reason I bring it up is that one of the great curiosities about American electoral process, and I say this as a Canadian, is that it's essentially structured around a series of debates, which is sort of weird because you're selecting on your debating skills, and then the minute you get into the office, you stop debating, right? So it's a very kind of odd. It's like we might as well see if they're good at playing golf or some,
we actually do a fair amount of that too.
But then, as I thought about it, so you're interested when you give the kind of character template that you think is so useful for original thinking, which has to do with self-reflection, humility, willingness to accept criticism, thoughtfulness, et cetera. All of those things are on display in a debate, right? So maybe the problem isn't the debate. Maybe the problem is the way in which we're interpreting behavior in a debate.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think that debates, end up largely rewarding the person who is most successfully aggressive, as opposed to the person who is able to, to bring a new perspective to the table or make us think differently. Phil Tetlock's work on foxes and hedgehogs is so relevant here, right? So hedgehogs know one thing well. They see the world sort of black and white. Foxes know many things and are constantly looking at shades of gray. And what Phil is always pointing out is that the candidates who get elected are the ones who speak like a hedgehog and who use very simple language and are very clear about their 1 or 2 or 3 policies. And that's exactly the opposite of the people who are good at predicting the future and making decisions. Mm-hmm. So I guess the candidate I want to vote for is the one who flip-flops all the time, the one who has sentences that don't end necessarily in any clear direction, who's grappling through complex ideas. But we don't really want to vote for those people because we don't trust them to steer the country.
Yeah. But I was wondering about how hard it would be to restructure debates so that we were looking for the right things. It's in some ways I think it's a little we can be a little bit unfair to the electorate, and a little unfair to the candidates because the candidates are performing up to a set of expectations. Yeah. The debate's structured to bring out that kind of response. It would be presumably it's possible to structure a debate that would bring out the kinds of qualities that you're interested in.
Yeah, but I don't think we should anchor on debates just because that's how we've always done it, right? Why not have a forecasting tournament where I would take every presidential candidate and give them 3 to 6 months ahead, here are a series of political and economic events that are binary. You can predict whether they're going to happen or not. So if we did this recently, we could ask, what is Putin going to do in Ukraine? Or what's going to happen to the euro? And then they make predictions, and we find out who's right. I want to vote for the person who does that best. Now, maybe they end up with all these teams that do it for them. That's a great proxy for knowing who to listen to. Mm-hmm. And those are the people I want to elect too. So I would rather see who can actually do the job. Let's simulate what the job involves as opposed to saying, let's do a debate.
Yeah, that's interesting.
I think so too, but I'm biased.
Okay, another of my little bones to pick. By the way, how are we doing on time? You have a whole chapter about that deals in part with the Segway and Dean Kamen. And my reaction to that was, you're really quite hard on him. Can you talk about the reasons why so many very, very smart people were wrong about the Segway? Lots of brilliant people in Silicon Valley said this is a game-changing, extraordinary piece of technology, and it wasn't exactly it did not live up to expectations in the marketplace.
Well, hold on. There is a very avid mall cop market for Segways right at this moment.
But my question is, you're asking a lot of an inventor, which is what he is, to also, I mean, no one doubts that the Segway is a brilliant invention.
Yeah.
Right? It happens not to have found a market yet. Why are you holding it against Dean Kamen?
I didn't mean to. I called him Batman. That's like the highest compliment that anyone can receive.
You did, but I mean, there's a point at which I sort of feel like people like that they can't tick off every single box. And there are certain traits which make you good at X, but also necessarily bad at Y.
But why? Elon Musk has done it.
Oh, see, I don't share the Elon Musk euphoria.
Why not?
Well, I think the car business the car thing goes out of business in about 3 years.
What about when you need a home and Mars is your only option and he's the reason we're there?
Right, yeah, my go-to guy for Mars. And I find I sort of think, and we don't have to pursue this because this is a massive tangent, but
isn't this whole conversation a massive tangent?
This is a mean thing to say, by the way, but this is what you get when you have a lot of really cheap money floating around Silicon Valley for a long time, which is you fund really speculative enterprise. His rocket thing, it's like, does that get funded in an environment where money is lent at decent rates of interest? No, it's like there's so much money sloshing around. They're throwing it at a guy who wants to send rockets to Mars. I mean, you can't make this up.
I don't know. I think that, look, he did something that NASA couldn't do in how many decades of sending a rocket and then landing it safely. The kind of innovation that's happened there, also being able to produce these rockets at a fraction of the cost. I think privatizing was the way to go there, and I think he's proving that. But to your larger point, I didn't mean to be hard on Dean. I meant to be hard, actually, on the investors who bet on it. Because that chapter was about false positives and false negatives, and how we have lots of original ideas in the world. And the problem isn't necessarily just getting more of them, but rather just we need to bet on the right ones and stop rejecting Harry Potter and stop saying the Segway is going to change the world. So he's a minor character.
But don't you like the spirit in which people thought that? I object to you calling the Segway a false positive. I think that the spirit in which the kind of thinking that leads you to believe in the Segway leads you to believe in lots of other things that maybe do turn out well. In other words, I don't think you can turn off enthusiasm for the Segway without turning off enthusiasm for lots of other really fascinating long shots.
I think you can, right? You can still have the enthusiasm. You can still fund the technology. You don't have to go and say this is going to change the world of transportation, right? You can bet on the invention without betting on the company. Can't you?
I'm not sure you can.
Why not?
This is a minor objection, but there is a little bit of the after the fact kind of.
Yeah, hindsight is 20/20 here,
yeah,
for sure.
Yeah.
Although to be fair, I remember sitting at my kitchen table the day it came out after all this buzz and saying, "That's it? Really? Like this is the thing that's going to be to the car what the car was to the horse and buggy? That didn't quite add up for me."
Yeah, I don't have a Segway stash in my closet at home either. But
I was starting to wonder.
But I kind of, because they went on, and then this will be my last point of this, because elsewhere you point out this, what I think this is that incredibly insightful observation from Dean Simonton, that what distinguishes the genius from the rest of us is not that they have a higher hit rate, but that they have more ideas than we do. In other words, a genius, by definition, has more misses than we do, right? But we have 3 ideas and they have 100. So if they're going to get 25 right and we're going to get 1 right. But that means, why isn't the segue just an example of geniuses missing?
It is, if you look at Dean Kamen's career. But he basically stopped everything else he was working on and spent several years on the segue. I would have much rather had his brilliant brain turn toward multiple innovations. And I think that's where it's a failure, right? Because we lose his time. And if we could do better at figuring out, okay, once he's perfected the technology, he shouldn't be spending years trying to figure out how to commercialize it. That's not his strength. There are lots of other people who can do that.
Yeah.
Let's let him do what he does best, which is inventing.
Yeah.
I don't think we disagree on that. But I think it halted his idea generation process. It's like taking William Shakespeare, and Shakespeare is working on this play which is called The Merry Wives of Windsor, which has been panned by critics. Nobody thinks it's a great masterpiece. It's like if Shakespeare said, instead of also working on this thing called Macbeth and Hamlet at that time, I'm just going to put everything in The Merry Wives of Windsor. That would be just such a travesty.
Doing a pilot for Fox. That's in turnaround, and he's on the phone with his agent the whole time. All right.
Wait, I want to ask you a question though, because this whole idea of generating lots of ideas, you've been at this now for 2 decades plus.
By the way, in the intro, it said I joined the New Yorker in 1986.
We added a whole decade, right?
Not that old. 96.
You
10 years. You can't just add 10 years to someone's life like that. Anyway.
So you invented this whole genre. Talk about being an original. You can deny it all you want, but I read The Tipping Point when I was in college. You were the only person who made social science cool.
Generational one-upmanship. He's just reminding you how much younger he is than I am. But go on.
No, but you had
go on, young man. Tell me about how you read me when you were in grade school.
To be fair, I also had you beat on the hair.
That's right.
It's up there.
Oh, look at you.
Anyway, you created this whole original genre where you took social science, you made it interesting and accessible to people, and you used it to help them turn their own beliefs upside down and also explain the world that they live in. Can you talk to us a little bit about your idea generation process and how you know when you're onto something good versus bad? Because the last we talked about this, you told me you just kind of go and wander through the New York Public Library a few times a year, which sounded a little strange.
No, I do that sometimes. Tell you stuff. I don't know. I don't really have there's no system. There's just a kind of, you remember, someone reminds you of something you said a couple of years ago, and you think, oh, that's sort of interesting. Or, I don't know, I just kind of read. I don't have an answer to that question. But how do you, it's that hard.
How do you know when something is worth writing about versus, this is a fun conversation to have at a dinner party?
Well, you don't. So that's why you write bad articles every now and again. I don't say you, I. And yeah, sometimes they don't work, which is kind of fine. I always think that the hostility people have to the things that don't work is out of place for this precise reason. So to go back to that Dean Simonton insight, which I think is so brilliant, I didn't explain it properly. So Simonton says, suppose you and I look at all our ideas and we realize that 25% of the ideas that I have are good and 75% are terrible. And then we compare me to Einstein. The difference between me and Einstein is not that Einstein has a 50% good idea, 50% bad idea. Einstein might have 10% good ideas, 90% bad ideas. But I have 5 ideas in a year, and Einstein has 500, right? So necessarily, Einstein has more bad ideas than I do. That's what makes him Einstein. So, well, that's not all that makes him Einstein. Einstein both has really amazing ideas, but also a huge number of terrible ones, right?
243 of them, if you look at his publication track record.
Yeah. So when you run into something bad from someone who you thought was good, as opposed to using that as evidence that denies their greatness, genius, talent, you ought to think of it to at least entertain the possibility that miss is proof of their talent, right? That is such a fantastically interesting idea to me. And it changes, it's why when you critique someone's work, you have to critique it with a certain amount of gentleness and consideration, because you don't know which category it's in. Either they've gone crazy and they're not any good anymore, or this is terrible precisely because they're geniuses and they're turning out lots of bad stuff in addition to the great stuff. And that's a huge question, right? And it conditions how you behave as a critic in the world.
So next time you write a bad article, I'm going to write and say, this is proof of your genius.
Yeah, this is why we think Gladwell's so damn good, that he's capable of turning out a complete turd from time to time. All right, let's look at some of these questions. This is what I kind of love. I'm totally a conformist and rule follower. What advice do you have for people like me? Well, you're the one who said, it's too late. Didn't you sort of say it was too late earlier?
I hope not.
Don't go to Penn, because the Penn professor says there's nothing he can do for you.
We can't control what direction you take it in, but hopefully we can help you think in
For
more original ways.
$65,000, you can't control someone's direction. Do you think maybe for 85? Is the problem you're not charging enough? Could you? There's a point at which you can start having like hall monitors and tutors in everyone's room, and you get to.
Wait, where do you want students to go if not to Penn then?
Well, University of Toronto, of course.
All right, wait, hold on. And how many Toronto professors do you cite versus Penn professors?
Well, there used to be for the longest time, for the first 10 years I was at the Washington Post, that is to say from 1996 to 2006, I made a point that in every article I wrote, I had to quote a Canadian. And it got to this point where it would get incredibly convoluted, because you'd be like down to the wire, you'd be like, I just can't find a Canadian to quote. And so you'd go off on some tangent, and everyone would say, well, what? Are you sure you want to go off on this tangent? You're like, oh, I think it's actually crucial to the whole. And it was all because you found someone from like British Columbia who you could like work into the story.
I always wondered why so many of your early articles were sorry, eh?
This reminds me of, this is a great, no, it's too much of a tangent.
We're not going to answer the first one, are we?
Here's one. It's interesting. What's the one thing you know?
There's only one.
What does that mean? It was sort of fascinating. Is there one thing you really know?
I wonder if that was an incomplete sentence. Like, what's the one thing you know about?
No, I think what he's saying is, after listening to you for the last 45 minutes,
there's only one.
There's only one thing. Just cut to the quick. Tell me what it is, for God's sake. I've been here
All right, I'll take a stab at this. The ability to give a good answer is far less important than the ability to ask a coherent question.
All right.
I'm just kidding.
Here's a good question. By the way, you're making you're violating one of the cardinal rules of being on stage.
Which is,
and I'm doing it too, but I'm not really the one. My reputation's not at risk here. I'm not trying to sell a book. You're dissing the audience.
Of course not.
Yeah, you are. Whoever that person was who wrote that, I thought, kind of a great question. You basically just thumbed your nose at this poor person. Okay. Has our constant preoccupation with technology hampered or enhanced our creativity?
Both. I think that on the one hand, it's given us much better access to other people's insights about our ideas. We are terrible judges of our own ideas and whether they're good or not. And it's so great now that it's easy to fire off an email or do a quick Facebook or Twitter post and get somebody's lightning fast reaction on whether your idea makes any sense or not. And I think that's helped us weed out a lot of bad ideas.
Wait, serious question, do you want a lightning fast? Is the fact that people can respond, quote unquote, with lightning speed a good thing or a bad thing? Because I think that goes to the
I think it's some of both. I think what's useful about it, though, is you can get the wisdom of crowds really quickly. And sometimes that can save you from going down all these like sort of blind alleys and dead ends. On the other hand, I think that, and there's a lot of evidence suggesting that the distractions that technology creates are creating this thing called attention residue. So Sophie Leroy has these cool studies where you work on task A, and then your performance on task B suffers, not in the multitasking sense, but because task A is still in your head. Yeah, like that.
Yeah.
And I think that's obviously problematic. But I think a lot of it depends on what kind of technology we're talking about. I think that cell phones and email have created a lot more barriers to creative thought than the technology that allows us to say to the Amazon Echo, hey Alexa, can you reorder this product? And then it shows up. Well, that's a bunch of minutes that I saved not having to go onto my computer or walk to the store. Right? So I think it's a double-edged sword.
Yeah. Do you? How does this play out in your own life? Do you have built-in moments of quiet and reflection, and when are they?
Yeah, so after our kids go to school in the morning, I usually, when I'm writing, I'll try to have 2 or 3 hours in front of my computer where there are no interruptions of any kind. And I usually save time for after our kids are in bed to catch up on email, knowing that I'm...
Wait, neither of those fall into the category of quiet reflection.
Sure they do.
So they're both, well, I work when my kids go off to school, and then when they go to bed, I also work. No, I'm talking about, Adam, reflection.
That's how reflection happens. Like, people email great questions, and I sit and think about them, and while I'm thinking about them, I answer someone else's email. And then there's a little bit of attention residue.
By the way, if that's what you call reflection, I think you need to reflect a little on your reflection. That's the...
Okay, so you're violating the second rule of being on stage, which is don't insult the author.
No, you're fair game. No, I'm talking about when you are off by yourself, you're not answering emails, and do you have moments where you are entirely an undistracted solitude?
Exercise, does that count?
Tell me about your exercise.
Like playing a game of Ultimate Frisbee, or...
Somewhere Henry David Thoreau is beeping.
No, or like lifting weights or running. Like they're pretty mindless tasks, and you can think and reflect. But no, I don't think that pure reflection time is all that useful.
Really?
Yeah. All right, so you are apparently even more introverted than I am, because I get bored with my own thoughts, right? It's the connection between my thoughts and other ideas in the world where like interesting sparks fly. And I think that, I guess like for me, reflection is like I'm sitting in front of my computer and I'm trying to figure out what I want to say. And I'm not entirely sure, right? And I'm thinking about it as I'm working. I don't do like a lot of off-work thinking.
You are famously productive. That's a correct statement, right?
I don't know what that means.
I mean, we have a mutual friend, another Adam.
Just one?
No, we had a number of them, but one of them, Adam Alter, another social psychologist of some note, I will say, who is himself very productive, but is in awe of your productivity. So when the productive are calling you a kind of productivity role model, you're up there.
It's like the worst thing to be a role model for. Like, wow, you do a lot of stuff.
Why does that? We've just been talking about how geniuses are characterized by the sheer number of ideas they come up with.
Yes.
Here I have, in my admittedly slightly underhanded way, tried to suggest you're a genius.
Why, thank you.
You have a problem with that?
No, but you forget all the bad ideas of those geniuses, right? So they're not known for their productivity, they're known for their masterpieces. So I think it's a problem, and it's a signal that you've not yet reached genius if somebody just knows you churning out a lot of output.
But why? Actually, this is a very interesting question. So geniuses are defined by the sheer number of ideas they have, not by their, by their misses as well as their hits. But we don't dwell on, you make this point in your book, that we spend precious little time dwelling on all the bad plays Shakespeare wrote, or the terrible, forgettable melodies that Mozart composed. Why don't we dwell on their bad stuff?
Because I think it destroys this myth that we carry about what a genius is, right? That their talent is so much greater than the rest of us that they're able to do just near perfect or at least better than human work every single time. And when we start to see them churn out bad ideas, we start to wonder, were we wrong about them? Were they really any good? And I guess the other piece of this that's fascinating to me is we look at these people and we expect them to be great. And what that forces us to do is say, look, I can never be one of them. And it gives us an out, right? We don't have to try because they were so much better than the rest of us. If they were ordinary, if they were more mere mortals, what's my excuse?
Yeah. But they do manage to, so what I was getting at was, is there some other element of genius is that they manage to artfully conceal their, I mean, are they conscious in the way that they kind of market their accomplishments such that they recognize when something's a stinker and make sure no one sees it?
I don't think that's true for most of them. There's this great study of Beethoven, where Beethoven was known as a pretty perceptive self-critic. And for 70 of his compositions, he wrote letters evaluating them to his friends and saying, yeah, this one's a dud, this one I'm really proud of. And he wrote a lot of them after he had audience feedback. His error rate was 33%. He committed 15 false positives, thinking that pieces were going to be extraordinary when they were pretty ordinary relative to his peers. And he had 8 that he thought were bad that turned out to be great. And so, he didn't even know which ones to hide.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of us don't.
Yeah. But doesn't that just mean that his criteria for evaluating what he found meaningful in his own work was different than ours?
Maybe. I mean, certainly as centuries pass, right? You can't fault him for not knowing what we appreciate about his music today. But he was even off in his own time. Mm-hmm. And I think that, yeah, you could say, he was looking for a certain musical achievement that was independent of taste. But, let's take someone like Thomas Edison, right? Edison, he was trying to commercialize innovation after innovation. And of his 1,093 patents, 6 or 7 turned out to have a real impact. That was not his goal, right? So I think that, if he could have concealed it, he probably would have, if only he'd known.
Yeah. I was interviewing some music producer. Guy was a big music producer in the 80s of all the new wave bands. And I asked him in his whole career, what accomplishment he was proudest of. And he named it was like this, the 6th Madness album, which is an album that no one either bought or listened to. But it was interesting for this very reason that I realized that his definition of accomplishment was just different. It wasn't the album that people loved or the album that people bought or the album that showed badness at their best. It was the album that showed him at his best. That was the one where he did the most creative work in making something acceptable out of something that was unacceptable. He traveled the greatest distance with the material.
Yeah, as opposed
but I
to
wonder whether, when Shakespeare is evaluating his own work, maybe what he's evaluating is sort of the degree of difficulty that he admires something about that composition that we just don't see because we're not Beethoven.
Yeah, Shakespeare didn't answer my interview request.
Sorry.
But I think that's right. I think we don't see the sausage being made, right? We see the end product. And it's really hard to know then what are the parameters that are relevant to the judgment.
Yeah. I've often thought that degree of difficulty, when it comes to evaluation, critical evaluation of work of all kinds, degree of difficulty is the one that's often, that particularly non-insiders don't appreciate. So they don't understand, sometimes I'll read something, and because I was a reporter for so many years, I understand that what that writer did was insanely hard. And maybe the outcome reads as mediocre or not that interesting, but because you know how insanely difficult the task was, you're in awe of the accomplishment. And I have that reaction all the time, but unless you have that kind of insider, and I feel like in every field, there is that, there's a particular perspective you get when you understand how hard it was.
Yeah, I guess it was inevitable that you were going to bring this back to diving with degree of difficulty.
I know, that's the beautiful thing that diving does.
That was very well played. But diving, for me, that was the most important part of diving, right? That if you could learn to do a harder dive, even if you did it less well, you got more credit for it. because it was known that anybody could have done the easier dive, with that level of grace. And it would be fascinating if we could take all of the different professions and have some consensus about degrees of difficulty of different tasks and weigh our performance evaluations by them.
Wait, but when you were a diver, would you rather do an easy dive perfectly or a hard dive imperfectly?
Well, you always want to do the hard dive perfectly.
Wait, but that's interesting. Is it uniformly true of divers that they always want to do the high degree of difficulty dive?
I think it's almost uniformly true because that's the only way that you can win. Otherwise, people will do harder dives than you and learn to do them just well enough that it'll be literally impossible for you to beat them.
Yeah.
When you do the math.
But what about, quite apart from winning, what about just your own personal satisfaction? Was doing a hard dive imperfectly more satisfying?
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. I mean, it was all about mastery, right? Like the winning was just a signal that you had, in fact, mastered something by the standards.
No, what I'm saying is doing a hard dive imperfectly, you haven't mastered it. You've partially mastered. Partially mastering something hard, is that more satisfying than mastering something easy?
Yeah, if something was easy, I didn't think about it as mastery, right? That's just like competence.
Yeah.
Like masters by definition are experts, and that means they do the hardest things in their field, and they do them as well as anyone else could do them.
What's the hardest dive you ever did?
It was probably a full twisting 2.5. So you somersault once, you open out of the somersault, do a horizontal twist.
Wait, what's a horizontal twist?
So a somersault is vertical, right? You're going head to toe. So after one somersault, you open and you twist your body like that, like a figure skater would. And you do that twist during a second somersault, and then you straighten out and dive in the water.
And you're doing this in how, what?
That was a 3-meter springboard.
9 feet.
Roughly.
You're doing all that in 9 feet.
Well, you jump much more than 9 feet if you don't screw up.
Good Lord, that's hard.
Wait, but you ran a mile in how many seconds under 5 minutes?
This is not about me, Adam. This is no.
No, tell us. What is your best mile time? You have to tell us that.
Well, it was when I was 14 years old.
And what was it?
Well, it was 1,500 meters, not a mile. It was.
All right, give us the Canadian version.
4:05.
4:05. How many people in the world could do that?
Well, actually, lots.
Then,
they just don't live in America.
Then, in 1946. Then.
That's right. Thanks, I get. Well, it's funny because I don't tell a story. I was nearly going to say something that was. I was nearly going to engage in an act of self-disclosure, and then I thought the better of it. All right, so we're almost done. Adam, should we keep going? I don't know if we have. What do you? I have other things. I have other bones to pick.
Yeah, pick away.
Maybe we'll do one more bone pick. So you have a long discussion. Is it okay that who's in charge? Maybe we are. Okay, we're going to do one more discussion, then we're going to call it a day. You have a chapter on Polaroid and Edward Land. Edward Land is founder of Polaroid, legendary figure in the history of photography. And you talk about the kinds of things. I'm supposed to wrap it up. All right, we'll do this real quickly. You talk about the kinds of things that caused Polaroid to fail in the end. But Polaroid, and this is a little minor bone to pick. Polaroid was an extraordinarily influential, profitable, successful company for many, 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 many years, but it didn't last forever. Is it fair to fault companies because they don't last forever? I sort of felt like you were being mean to him the same way I thought you were being a little bit mean to Dean Kamen.
Well, it feels like reciprocity for when you told our Penn students that they couldn't play sports anymore. That was mean too.
No, that was. I mean, I was in the spirit of radical honesty. I was forcing them to confront their own drawbacks their own limitations as entitled, overeducated, upper middle class.
Ouch. No, I don't think we should fault a company for not lasting forever. I think we should fault a company for being in a position to continue bringing original ideas and products into the world and failing. So Polaroid had very early access to digital technology, and they could have pioneered the digital camera. And instead of saying, look, we want to enrich what Polaroid stands for, they said, we're all about cultural fit. We're going to hire people who think the same way as us, which means they know silver halide and chemicals, as opposed to zeros and ones in the digital world. And we're going to ignore this innovation, because why would anyone ever want to take a picture without printing it? Right? It's the print that you value, which is why we sell the film and basically give away the camera. And if they had let go of that earlier, it's possible they could have done a lot of continued great things. And I think it's a really unfortunate outcome for the world, because Polaroid was an innovation factory. And I think we lost a lot of originality when they went bankrupt. So I'm not faulting the company for not surviving forever. I'm saying they had a chance to continue the greatness that they had, and they blew it.
But doesn't you're using as your kind of unit of measurement the company, but why wouldn't you use as a unit of measurement the economy, and say the fact that Polaroid persists in its dogged pursuit of physical film opened the door for upstarts to come along and do digital? In other words, why can't we just accept the fact that what innovation is people have a fantastic commitment to a set of ideas. They pursue them until they're no longer useful, and someone else takes their place. That strikes me as being a much more realistic depiction of the way human beings operate, as opposed to saying the leopard then has to change its spots at the age of.
Yeah, I mean, if you take that life cycle perspective, I think that's exactly what happened. I think, though, that it falls short of what Edwin Land was creating at Polaroid. I mean, this was not an ordinary original guy. He was literally Steve Jobs' role model. And if you look at the number of patents, the diversity of innovation, he solved many problems that were thought to be impossible. And he also created an organization that was able to do that at scale, which very, very few are. And I think that we should aspire to create more of those, because when you do it well, it's a fragile thing. And it's, if that goes away, maybe a lot of these startups are not going to be as great, and originality is going to falter. Yeah. That's what I worry about.
Yeah. Well, on that note, that's a lovely way, I think, to end.
Well,
thank you.
Sort of. Except for, I did want to say a couple things in closing, if I can take over here.
This evening has taken a sudden, terrifying turn.
That was my goal. I wrote about this nonconformity thing. Why follow the rules? Why should you be in charge of the whole show?
All right.
No, I just wanted to say a few things. First of all, there's some amazing, amazing people in the room who have helped me a lot with these ideas. And I'm really grateful that we got such a fantastic turnout. Secondly, today is the anniversary of the loss of one of the greatest writers of our time, who is a really important mentor to me, Jeff Zaslow. Many of you will remember Jeff for the last lecture, which he wrote with Randy Pausch, for being the guy who took over for Ann Landers, and was just a deeply moving writer who lived everything that I study about generosity and originality. And two of Jeff's daughters are here in the room today, and I just wanted to take a moment to remember Jeff. And the last thing that I wanted to do is say a huge thanks to Malcolm Gladwell for sharing his evening with us. Thank you.